start out by passing around something that motivates me. And I hope that with this speech, I'll give you some tools that will keep you from being considered a curmudgeon by others. So Nick Taleb, who's famous for writing a book about something called the Black Swan, coined that phrase to describe an event or an occurrence that no one could imagine happening. So here you see a black swan. Wait a minute. This black swan is the ballerina from the movie. This is the black swan that Nick was talking about. Europeans couldn't imagine the existence of a black swan because all the swans that they had seen were white. But as the world was explored, it was discovered there was a species of swan that was black. Members of my organization and people like me, who are operations research analysts, use models and other tools to try to understand the world, to try to describe problems, and to try to solve problems. Nick Taleb also coined another term called the ludic fallacy. And the ludic fallacy occurs when people like us create this model and then try to apply it to the real world, and we're stuck inside the box defined by the model. And so it's my purpose to help you and members of my organization to find ways to think outside of that box. So first step is, and it's often ignored, is to define the box. But let's go back first and talk a little bit about where this phrase, thinking inside the box, came from. So in the 70s and since then, there's been this little puzzle that's given to people. And what they're asked to do is to take a pen and draw 4 straight lines and connect all the dots. And 99.99% of the people in the world can't do this. In this particular diagram, I've conveniently drawn a box around the dots to help you. But if you don't know how to do it, you probably still won't solve the problem. So I'm not going to ask you to do it. I'll show you how it's done. You draw a line, another line, another line.
Oh, you have to go out of the line.
Another line. And the point is you have to go outside the box. Now, motivational speakers and management consultants and stuff since the 70s have propagated this particular puzzle and this particular thing in an attempt to help people think outside the box. Studies show it's useless. Totally useless. First, did you really recognize that rectangle as the box? I didn't, even though I put it there for your purpose. But beyond that, where was the box? Who defined the box? What is the box? So I argue our first step is to discover the box. And I'm going to describe to you a method that I use to define the box that I'm in when I'm looking at a problem. I'm trying to either define the problem or solve the problem. Beyond that, I'm going to give you some methods that various people have used and suggest for thinking outside the box. And Annette's speech was a perfect lead-in to this particular discussion. And Fred's topic of New Beginnings also fits perfectly with it. So I'm fortunate to be here today to add to what they've already provided. So I said we had to define the box. So raise your hand if you thought of all these things when I said define the box. Do you see all the boxes here? Is there anybody that spots something that's not a box there? You know, box, 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 box. Some of us just check the box a lot. A few of us think of a box turtle as a box. I've opened a box and found my grandson Marcus. And I passed around that picture. He's there. You'll hear more about him as I give this speech. So hasn't made it your way. That's an iconic sort of image for me because that's exactly where I might find my grandson Marcus. But we got to find the box. And oh, by the way, did you think of a box that what didn't have right angles? This is a pyramid gift box that you can construct. It's a box. Maybe you don't think so. So I said I had a method of my own for defining the box. I like to call this method the method of discourse. I learned it over time as I took classes in discussion and argumentation and debate and negotiation. And I learned it because of my mathematical background. And so it works for me. It might not work for you, but I want to introduce you to it because I think it has some importance. So this is a picture I use to describe my box. What I do is try to understand what the foundations or premise is for the conclusions that I have, and how you combine those together with a logical argument until you reach a final conclusion or a final solution. I like to write this, in a sort of a mathematical graph form, but you might write it down as a narrative. You might illustrate it as a cartoon. You might, do any number of things that fit your way of defining the box. But I'm pleading with you, step one, if you want to think outside the box, define the box. In our organization, we write what we call constraints, limitations, and assumptions. And that defines the box that we work in when we do a study. Now, it's not enough to simply write down your premise. You have to look at it with a skeptic's eye. And you have to ask, is there somebody who doesn't believe this premise? Or is there someone who doesn't understand this premise? I mean, we have to brief general officers and senior civilians, people like the Secretary of the Army and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, very smart people. But they might not understand all of the foundations and all the premises that we're bringing forward in our analysis. So you have to question who doesn't believe this premise and strengthen your argument until your foundation is solid. You also use logic to combine some of that foundation together into some sort of conclusion. Not everybody follows your logic. Not everybody believes it's sound. Mathematically, you might know it's sound. That's of no help because thinking is not a solitary event. When you communicate what you think to others, you have to get them to buy into what you believe. So you have to also examine the things that came together to help you get to that conclusion. Maybe you left out some part of the foundation. Maybe you need to decompose it into more steps. But part of defining your box is helping other people to understand how you came to conclusions. Now, I call the final conclusion a final conclusion instead of a solution because you don't solve all problems. Sometimes the biggest benefit that an analyst can bring to a decision maker is to help him understand his problem. Because his understanding initially of the problem may be incomplete or incorrect. So, when you're done, when you've polished this up, when you've presented it to people, when you've found critics, when you've done all that you can do, now you have a box, which I illustrate with a box around my method. This is my method, but it works for me. It might work for some of my analysts. We're people trained in mathematics and systems analysis and physics and those kinds of things, but it might not work for you. So what are some other methods for thinking outside the box? And the first thing I'll do is give you a method that is the rage today. Anywhere you look in the media and the internet, you find numbered lists. People love numbered lists. Why? Because first, the number tells you how much is going to be there, so you know the beginning and the end. Second, it doesn't go on forever. It's relatively compact. Somebody else has done all that work of classification, categorization, thinking about it, putting some things in, putting some things out. Remember, I said thinking is not a solitary event. You don't make this list just for yourself. You're making it for everybody else you work with. And you're getting criticism from them about your list until you have a list that applies to whatever the topic is. Our topic's wacky ideas for thinking outside the box, so make a list. But there are other things that you can do. If you're really stuck, go study another discipline. As I said, I'm an operations research analyst trained in mathematics and computer science and artificial intelligence and all these other fancy things. But when I had to study counterinsurgency, I had to model and analyze it, and I had to go to Afghanistan to support it, I studied social science. I studied sociology and psychology and social psychology and anthropology. Study another discipline, because that will help you have other modes of thinking, other ways to approach problems, and will take you well outside of where you are. Next, learn another philosophy. Personally, I learned the Tao. But get outside of whatever religion and philosophy is your own, learn another. Take a class. Read an unfamiliar genre. Recently I read Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. In the original, not what the textbooks say about it. You'll learn a lot. Write a poem. Fred gave us a limerick one time. That's probably the level for a lot of us, but some of you can probably write sonnets that Shakespeare would admire and steal. Personally, I like haiku, but I'm also inspired by Dr. Seuss. So write a poem, draw a picture, then turn it upside down. Pictures and poems and other things help you connect your creative brain to your logical brain. Work backwards. That's how we teach military officers to plan. Start with the end state and find different ways to get to today. Ask a child for advice. I passed around a picture of my grandson. He gave my daughter great advice when she wanted to go to the gym. He told her the gym was poo. Invite randomness. Jackson Pollock threw paint against the wall and turned it into great art. There was a PBS artist who taught people how to paint, and he would make happy little mistakes and turn those into a part of the picture. Invite randomness. Take a shower. Einstein said take a walk, but a lot of people say take a shower. Get your mind off the problem. And if that doesn't work, join Toastmasters. So the original problem comes from Gestalt psychology, not from the dot problem. This is the solution. This is the box that I just told you about. And remember what Kurt Vonnegut said. Everything's nothing with a twist. Thank you.